Welcome to NewsWire here on this Thursday, a historic day in both college and professional coaching. We've seen turnover like never before in the National Football League, and a historic moment in college as well, as arguably one of, if not the greatest college football coaches of all time decides to call it quits. Great to be with you here on the show. We're going to break it all down for you, all the movement over the last 24 hours as coaches headed to both the Collegiate Hall of Fame and Pro Football Hall of Fame are either looking for a new destination or maybe ending their careers. Vinnie Iyer will be with us from the Sporting News. He will break it all down with us coming up in about 10 minutes from now. Also, the very latest on sports wagering and also the daily fantasy landscape in my home state of Florida. Sam McQuillan joins us. And a little bit later in the program, speaking of coaching changes, a player who used to play for the Seattle Seahawks, which is where Pete Carroll, of course, coached for many years, Robert Turpin is going to join us to weigh in on exactly what is next there. So I feel like I broke the lead here a little bit in the early part of the show by giving you the guest program. But naturally, that's one of the stories that we're following. And I thought, honestly, that would be the lead story on our show today. But that ends up being the third story of the day because the top one happened this morning. It is Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots agreeing to part ways. More than 2 decades, 24 seasons, 9 Super Bowl appearances, 6 Super Bowl titles, and 266 regular season wins, 30 wins in the postseason. Bill Belichick, the only thing left for him to accomplish in his storied career would be catching Don Shula in terms of all-time wins. And there's some speculation that that could potentially happen. Now, as far as New England is concerned, no word yet on exactly what their future will hold. They're holding a press conference in 1 hour from now with Bill Belichick and the owner, Robert Kraft, and maybe we will get some answers. But if it's a Belichick conference, I'm not sure that we'll get any because we never have before. But who knows? Maybe we will get some coming up. Now, another bombshell dropped, and this was late yesterday, as Nick Saban, who has won 7 national championships. I don't think you understand the scope of that in college football or in college sports. A little different in pro football, but in college, when you're constantly having to grind and find new kids to join your college, Nick Saban did it like nobody else did. 6 with Alabama, 1 with LSU, 5 SEC Coach of the Year awards, and quite frankly, probably the most popular player in terms, or a person in terms of college sports over the last 2 decades. But Saban, no real definitive answer as to specifically why he's decided to retire. There's a lot of speculation. I'll get into this a little bit later in the show, that this is all based on these new NIL program where the players are now able to be compensated. So Saban essentially recruits players, then has to re-recruit them to stay, also has to re-recruit players to leave, to pay them to come to the school. Not sure Saban wanted to get involved in that. I'm sure we'll get answers in the coming days. But that is at least the story that we begin with. And then the final piece of news, which could have been the lead, honestly, here on the show, is Pete Carroll, pushing 75 years old, says he's not done, doesn't know what's next, but he is stepping down as the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Won a Super Bowl, of course, with them. A lot of success in college as well at Southern California, coached with the New York Jets, New England Patriots as well. Pete Carroll stepping down. The Seahawks are also looking for a new head coach. This is a carousel like we've never seen in the National Football League. Okay, now to some other headlines that don't involve coaching. Yesterday on his show, Pat McAfee said that Aaron Rodgers won't appear on his show during the playoffs. There are most that think that Rodgers was not scheduled to appear during the playoffs anyway, so conspiracy theorists have at it. The Vikings general manager says that he wants Kirk Cousins to return to the team next season. And in the end, if you look at the stats, it's going to be really hard to replace Kirk Cousins at quarterback. My guess is he would be highly coveted, so that makes sense there. The Bears, the Vikings, and yes, the Jaguars are playing a home game in London next season. Jacksonville, generally speaking, plays a home game in London every single year. And unfortunately, this is a horrible story out of Hard Rock Stadium, or close to Hard Rock Stadium, last week after the Bills-Dolphins game. A Bills fan who was shot did pass away after an altercation after Sunday's game with the Miami Dolphins and Buffalo Bills. Terrible story there. Never want to see that happen with fans, obviously. Okay, now with Nick Saban leaving Alabama, one of their top wide receiver commitments has decided to decommit. His name is Ryan Williams. If you're not familiar with him, he was the number 3 receiver in ESPN 300's rankings and the number 9 overall prospect heading to college. Zahir Mathis, he's committed to Ohio State. He's a defensive end. Northwestern's great defensive back Rod Hurd II is transferred to Notre Dame. He was picking between Notre Dame and Michigan. And the NCAA is going to provide athletes with standardized recommendations moving forward for NIL contracts. Now, keep in mind, as of now, still the wild, wild west as far as anything is concerned. Maybe the resignation of Nick Saban will change some of the way that NILs are handled, but at the very least, what they're trying to do is figure out how some players can properly do this without taking advantage of. Okay, in the NBA, little surprise yesterday that we heard that Kawhi Leonard has signed a new contract extension with the LA Clippers. How about that? 3 years, $153 million, no player options. So it looks like Kawhi's career could potentially end in Los Angeles. Netflix is creating a new NBA docuseries. If you watched NFL Quarterback, which was really popular on Netflix, they're featuring LeBron James and Jason Tatum, Jimmy Butler, Anthony Edwards, and Domantas Sabonis on this new show that is featuring the NBA, very similar to how they did the National Football League in their show Quarterback. LeBron James and Bronny James are appearing on a card in a new Fanatics deal. There's been a lot of new ideas been brought by Topps and Fanatics. You may remember Tom Brady was in a Montreal Expos uniform in a recent series too. This one is going to be a one-of-one card with LeBron and Bronny, obviously signing their card. So good luck pulling that in the pack. It's not going to happen. The NBA has denied the Knicks $7.8 million disabled exception for the loss of Mitchell Robinson. So they're sort of going to have to eat that one there. Okay, other quick news and notes here before we get to the break, and then we hit back on the college football and pro football landscape. We've got a 4-year, $53 million deal. Yesterday, we talked about this on the show. The contract is official for Shota Imanaga with the Chicago Cubs. Connor Bedard of the Chicago Blackhawks going to miss the All-Star game. He's out 6 to 8 weeks after receiving surgery for a broken jaw. And this was a team that was traveling to the Africa Cup of Nations in the Ivory Coast. This team, Gambia, their team plane was rerouted. A very scary story due to lack of oxygen on the plane. Some players were seen passing out. They had to be rerouted. This could have potentially been a disaster. Thank goodness it was not. Novak Djokovic and Iga Swiatek are going to be the top seeds at the upcoming Australia Open as tennis gets ready here to launch off here in the 2024 campaign. That's the latest that we have for you. But coming up next, of course, it's the top story, not just in sports, but in news as well. The resignation and the parting of the ways of Bill Belichick. But there also are some historical coaches that are potentially looking for gigs. Pete Carroll, will he continue? Mike Vrabel, by all accounts, did a really good job outside of the last year and a half with the Tennessee Titans. Could he potentially fit into one of those? What do the Commanders and the Falcons do? We'll dive into it all next as Vinnie Iyer joins us on NewsWire. Fun to do because you could kind of, place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting. But New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, a Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
NewsWire, only on SportsGrid.
Quarterback at quarterback. We're going to lay some juice. We're going to have some dog prices, and we're going to go right in the middle.
Because I don't know what they're doing. To me, they're in a complete rebuild, Kev.
Go run, run, run. That's where overbackers on this 51.5 shot.
So right now, we saw a little bit more over money, but it's hovering right around.
The winner of this game will be the division favorite.
I don't care if they win, because all we care about is the money, baby, the money.
Pro Football Today. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
The Weiss said we're getting the Stanley Cups, and now they got Stanley Cups in West Virginia.
Yep. They're doing $300 million gross a year in sales.
Listen, man, we don't need that much, man.
They're crushing
I'll take
it.
a little piece of the Stanley Cup. I would drink from the Stanley Cup every day. I'll have inscribed on there. We'll get our BVB inscribed.
Yeah.
Stanley Cups.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
That tells you how good this league is. Jeff, you're mine. Big 12, who's the team to beat?
Well, it's always Kansas. I don't care who comes in the league. And I love Kelvin Sampson, what he's done at Houston. I don't care. So Marquette, to me, is the best backcourt in the country. Tyler Kolek's the best point guard. Cam Jones is an elite scorer who just plays with such a good pace, and he's so smart.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
What did you think when you saw Lawrence on 3rd and 4th down, those two plays?
When you have a meltdown like the Jaguars had, the clear favorite coming into the season, we all know that, and they choke like they did, and they have this fall like they did, people are going to question what's wrong with Trevor Lawrence. He had a regression. It's not a major one, but he was not as good as last season. What's happened to the play calling?
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Yay, congratulations, but the game was over at that point, so another one of those terrible beats. If you had 3.5, 4, even 4.5, this was a 10-point game until the final closing seconds.
In-game live, prime time, only on SportsGrid.
SportsGrid, the only streaming sports betting network. Tips, info, and insights to up your IQ. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire. Vinnie Iyer at Sporting News. It's going to be really busy over the next few days. Really busy. He thought that this was the time where he could just pick games. He was going to come on the show. We're going to talk about point spreads, but no. We've got some insane things happening in the National Football League, Vinny. I mean, like every year there is a coaching carousel. There's 2, 3, 4 guys, that we expect they're going to lose gigs and we're going to find new gigs. We've had coaches fired during the season. But what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 days, Vinny, is sort of unprecedented with 2 players that inevitably are going to be I keep saying players, 2 coaches that are going to be inevitably in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and a couple of others that I think are going to have an easy time getting gigs as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting the way it turned out. We thought we were good for a little while. We were focusing on the Bears, and here come the Titans, here come the Seahawks, here come the big one, the Patriots, right? I mean, you look at this and the level of openings here, this is 25% of the league. That's insane right now. And you could have a little bit of maybe cross-pollination with some of these guys maybe landing in the spots that are vacant, namely Mike Vrabel and Bill Belichick. You would think those two. I think everyone else, with Pete Carroll going upstairs in an advisory role, whatever you want to call it, with Seattle, maybe he's taking a year off of coaching. He was close to retirement anyway. So it'll be interesting to see how these openings are filled. And there's also the one wild card, even with Nick Saban retiring, there's Jim Harbaugh still available and seeing what he might do coming out of Michigan or staying there.
Yeah, look, I mean, that will be probably a top priority for every team that has an opening in the National Football League. Maybe the only coach that would be above that would be Bill Belichick now that he's leaving New England. And look, maybe Vinny will get some clarity on this an hour from now when he holds his press conference. Now, what I know about Bill Belichick, Vinny, because this time of the year, as crazy as it sounds, I see Bill Belichick a lot because he has a home in Jupiter, Florida. He has his boat all the time out there. And, he's always in Florida. And so I was thinking to myself, where's the destination for Bill? Well, I mean, is it crazy to think that he'd push Doug Peterson out of Jacksonville? Or would it be Atlanta? Because I think his landing spot, Vinny, call me crazy, I think it's going to be in the South somewhere. I think the cold weather is over for him. So I understand why ESPN would speculate that this morning.
Yeah, definitely you would think he's going to be trying to do a half retirement type deal with this next coaching job as he tries to chase Don Shula's all-time wins record. I think that's the last thing left on the table. He may not add another Super Bowl, but he can turn around a team with his personal acumen, his defensive coaching, get a franchise quarterback. So I think that is all going to come into play, right? And he's going to maybe handpick where he wants to go. Does he like Trevor Lawrence in that situation? Is there a chance that Shad Khan could change his mind and give him a home down there? Or is there a situation that could develop later, say Tampa and Todd Bowles wants to step down or whatever? Who knows, right? There's some options here other than Mike McDaniel in Miami that could happen. And I think if you're going to go close to the Southeast, I guess you would look at Atlanta there as a potential. I know it's not necessarily the juiciest job here with where they're at and just the marquee level of that franchise. So something to look at. But I think the big team we're going to watch here, Washington Commanders. They have Josh Harris. He's been intrigued, the new owner, about Bill Belichick for a while. Now that he's officially available, and the Commanders, want to turn this thing around. And Belichick being a guy with the Naval Academy ties and all that, not too far. So maybe the Commanders being a historical significance there with way that Vince Lombardi and George Halas and some others finished their career there.
Yeah, I love the guessing game that we're playing. I'm guessing location, you're guessing military. I like it. Listen, we could do this all day long. Okay, so let's get to Pete Carroll. When he decides to retire, he'll go in the Hall of Fame as a coach in the NFL. He's done it for a long time, high level, Super Bowls, won wherever he went, won in college as well. Interesting comments from him yesterday saying that he's still not done and he's invigorated and wants to keep going. I personally think, Vinny, it's going to be a little bit tougher for him in an organization because, again, whoever you're hiring, you're not committing a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal. You're looking toward the future. But look, stranger things have happened. Do you think that Pete Carroll lands a head coaching job again in the NFL?
I think there's that potential, but keep in mind, he's 72. He's older than Bill Belichick and Nick Saban at this point. So I think there was some talk that he could retire on his own. And it's hard to say how much this was a mutual move, right? I don't think it was very much of a mutual move. I mean, I think they said, okay, you can stay in the organization, but you're going to have to do this. Now, the question is, does he want to commit to that, right? It's kind of weird to be kicked upstairs and not doing what you do best for the organization. So it's a very strange development here. I think with the Titans, I could see it. They're kind of fickle with coaches. The Patriots, we saw this coming to Belichick. Carroll's a tricky one. And then seeing where he might go next. I mean, I don't know. Would he care to go back to college? And there's a lot of openings that would develop there, right? And if he wants to rejuvenate himself again, like he did leaving the Jets and going to college, maybe that happens again with the Seahawks in college in his final stop.
Now, Mike Vrabel is a little bit of a perplexing one to me, Vinny, because, look, I did not think the Titans were going to be very good over the last couple of years, but he was a coach that I felt did more with less. I don't know if you feel that way or if it's fair to say. I don't think he'll have an issue getting another coaching job. To me, I really don't know what Tennessee's doing, to be honest with you here. Like, I mean, what coach is going to come in here and look at the talent group that they have and just immediately say, wow, like I can do a better job than this guy? I mean, Vrabel pulled off arguably the two biggest upsets of the NFL season with beating the Dolphins in Miami and then beating Jacksonville on the last day of the year.
Yeah, I mean, look at the two previous seasons before the Titans fell off here, 23-10, and they're rebuilding, right? They had some personnel issues, guys getting older, trying to figure out quarterback, going from Ryan Tannehill was very good for a short period of time to go into Will Levis. And now Derrick Henry is probably on his way out here. So he's maybe not seen as a transitional coach, right? Maybe with what we have and we can maybe scrape together enough wins to overachieve here, but maybe he's not the guy that they wanted for the rebuild. Keep in mind, this team also dismissed their general manager earlier in 2023. So there's a lot of maybe fickle feelings here on the top of Titans ownership. Keep in mind, they dismissed Mike Mularkey to replace him with Mike Vrabel after he won a playoff game in Kansas City.
Yeah, no, makes sense here. Now, the last two names of coaches who have been let go, Vinny, hard to see them getting gigs, at least in 24. I don't know about the future for you, but I think Ron Rivera and Arthur Smith. Rivera, certainly a wonderful guy, very great human, and, you're wishing him nothing but the best, but I don't see him coaching again at that level, Vinny, in the NFL. Arthur Smith, I could see it, but he's going to have to be a coordinator for a couple of years again, I would think.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is, what do these two teams really struggle with this season? Ron Rivera's Commanders defense. They had to part ways with Jack Del Rio. What did the Falcons struggle with? Getting all those first-round picks, Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts and Drake London to play together and produce consistent offense with an offensive-minded coach. That does not bode well, right? To say I want to get these guys going somewhere in a situation where I want them as a coordinator right away. So, yeah, it could be a long wait. I think with Rivera, this might be he's cycled out of it. And then you look at Arthur Smith. Look, he's a son of a billionaire, so he can take his time and go with that. And I don't know, maybe that last scene of him fighting with Dennis Allen on the field and all the Arthur Blank fallout, maybe keeping a lot of teams away from giving him a second chance.
I think he'll get one. It just could be some time before that happens, like some head coaches in the NFL. All right, Vinny. Well, great to catch up with you once again. I'm sure you have a lot of writing to do at Sporting News, not to mention the games this weekend, which we didn't even get a chance to get into today. So we'll do it next week. Thanks again, Vinny, for coming on.
All right, thanks, Craig. Have a good one.
All right, Vinnie Iyer, sportingnews.com. Coming up next, Sam McQuillan joins us of Legal Sports Report. Daily fantasy in Florida is seeming to be in somewhat of jeopardy now that sports betting is legal. Is it a coincidence? We'll ask Sam McQuillan that next. Fun to do because you could kind of, place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting. But New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, a Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
NewsWire, only on SportsGrid.
Quarterback at quarterback. We're going to lay some juice. We're going to have some dog prices, and we're going to go right in the middle.
Because I don't know what they're doing. To me, they're in a complete rebuild, Kev. Go run, run, run. That's where overbackers on this 51.5 shot.
So right now, we saw a little bit more over money, but it's hovering right around.
The winner of this game will be the division
I don't care if they win, because all we care about is the money, baby, the money.
Pro football today. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
The wife said we're getting the Stanley Cups, and now they got Stanley Cups in West Virginia.
Yep. They're doing $300 million gross a year in sales.
Listen, man, we don't need that much, man.
They're crushing
I'll take
it.
a little piece of the Stanley Cup. I would drink from the Stanley Cup every day. I'll have inscribed on there. We'll get our BVB inscribed.
Yeah.
Stanley Cups.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
That tells you how good this league is. Jeff, you're mine. Big 12. Who's the team to beat?
Well, it's always Kansas. I don't care who comes in the league. And I love Kelvin Sampson, what he's done at Houston. I don't care. So Marquette, to me, is the best backcourt in the country. Tyler Kolek's the best point guard. Cam Jones is an elite scorer who just plays with such a good pace, and he's so smart.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
What did you think when you saw Lawrence on 3rd and 4th down, those two plays?
When you have a meltdown like the Jaguars have, the clear favorite coming into the season, we all know that, and they choke like they did, and they have this fall like they did, people are going to question what's wrong with Trevor Lawrence. He had a regression. Not a major one, but he was not as good as last season. What's happened to the play calling?
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Yay, congratulations, but the game was over at that point, so another one of those terrible beats. If you had 3.5, 4, even 4.5, this was a 10-point game until the final closing seconds.
In-game live, prime time. Only on SportsGrid.
SportsGrid, the only streaming sports betting network. Tips, info, and insights to up your IQ. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. Each and every day we have a guest contributor from Legal Sports Report. Today our friend Sam McQuillan is with us, as sports betting now legal in the state of Florida only via the Seminole Tribe of Florida and their gaming program. But what does that mean for the future of daily fantasy sports? Well, Sam is with us to talk about that. And, you know, certainly, Sam, I knew that this was coming down. You know, like I kind of had a feeling that once Florida got sports betting, that everything else would be scrutinized. And indeed, not just scrutinized, but boy, it does feel like there are some folks who would like to eliminate DFS unless they want to pay the tax. And I don't know that that's going to happen. But anyway, thanks for joining us here on the show. I'm following, of course, this very closely because I live in Florida.
Yeah, absolutely, Craig. Yeah, to your point, pretty much when any state legalizes sports betting, they then kind of take a look back at what are our fantasy rules? What are our regulations around daily fantasy sports? Maybe some of these apps which can look pretty similar to sports betting. And in a lot of cases, in these states like Florida, like California, big states where you really had no legal sports betting option, people really turned to fantasy sports kind of in lieu of that. And it kind of filled that void for a while. And now that you have the Hard Rock Bet app back online in Florida, you know, people are betting a lot on it, obviously. But to your point, the people who control that are kind of looking at what they view as maybe their competitors who have been operating in Florida for a while. So there's been a few bills introduced already this session in Florida, which just started a few days ago, that would propose kind of regulating the daily fantasy sports industry. Now, Florida is one of those states where essentially it's the Wild West for these fantasy sports companies. They've been operating for years despite no real rules or regulations saying they can or can't. And according to who you talk to, it could be very different, kind of the view on whether or not they're legal. But you have DraftKings, FanDuel, Better, Prize Picks, Underdog Fantasy, all among the apps that have operated there for years without any real, you know, pushback from the state. But that's all starting to change now that you have sports betting back online. This new bill from a Florida senator would essentially create the framework to regulate the industry, putting in place different rules and regulations, including a minimum 21 years old age to play. And another provision, which is probably the most important thing here, is that operators could not be contestants in the contests that they offer. This takes aim at the player versus house model, which has been really successful for companies like Prize Picks and Underdog, which offer these pick'em games that essentially allow you to parlay together different player props over unders in return for a prize. So a number of states have kind of identified this as sports betting. Florida is one of those. Their commission came out recently and sent cease and desist letters to these companies and broke decades of silence on what they believe to actually be sports betting. Now, they don't really have the wherewithal or the tools to enforce these regulations, and that's what the bill would create and allow them to do. It's unlike another bill in the House, which would essentially create the framework for these games, but allow the pick'em games to be included. So far, we've got two kind of competing pieces of legislation in Florida, and obviously a ton of groups involved with, the Seminoles being behind Hard Rock Bet. So it's going to be an interesting session in Florida when you have all these kind of competing, operators and competing interests here, and different lawmakers already taking different stances. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens going forward. Could it lead to these operators pivoting to peer-to-peer games more, as they've done in a few other states? Certainly, but whether or not they do that depends on how far Florida goes with enforcing this fantasy regulation, and only things can be done through the Seminole Tribe.
Yeah, no, it's just natural. As you said, it's been happening in every state. Once it's legal, they're like, let's find out whether or not everybody else operating is doing the right thing. So part of it is taxes for me. Part of it is, clearly cleaning it up. But I don't know which is more important right now in these states. Speaking of which, is Missouri going to get their act together with sports betting, Sam? I mean, I thought over the last year we'd be breaking some news talking about how they've legalized sports betting. And it certainly feels like there was at least a 50-50 shot that this was going to happen. But they've fallen behind the possibility for some other states having it legalized. What's the latest there?
Yeah, Missouri's been late to the pretty much for one reason. There's this one lawmaker, a senator named Denny Hoskins in Missouri, who has vowed to stop every effort to legalize sports betting unless he gets his way on legalizing video lottery terminals, which are pretty much just kind of digital, what they sound like digital slot machines and things of that nature, which exist in the state, but kind of under a gray area of law where they're not really legal and there's no enforcement against them. The main problem there is the casinos really don't want that to happen. They kind of see it as something that could steal from their business. So essentially the casinos are all for sports betting, but they're not for video lottery terminal legalization. And Hoskins has, been in the middle of that roadblock saying, hey, if I don't get my way, I'm just going to filibuster every bill. And that's what he's done for the past 2 years, past 3 years. It's watching it happen has been, astonishing, just spending hours to kill this bill, which you can do in law. It's kind of a crazy reality of it that this one guy is holding the whole thing up. But now you have some more pressure, a renewed effort in Missouri. There is some legislation that's swirling that faces maybe the same fate with Hoskins, but there's another option out there which should give some Missourians hope that want sports betting. It's this ballot initiative, which just got approved to gather signatures by the Secretary of State, which could legalize sports betting on its own, essentially bypassing the legislature, giving the power to the people to figure it out. So that could put added pressures on lawmakers to figure it out and get their bill in before this other bill comes here. But they need about 170,000 signatures by May 5th in order to get it on the ballot. We've seen states like California be successful getting it on the ballot. What happens after that, isn't always great. Florida has tried this before. They failed to get the signatures. Most other states where this has happened, they get the signatures. But so far, what they're telling Legal Sports Report and my colleagues at Legal Sports Report is they want to see kind of more effort, more money put behind it. If we're going to do this signature gathering, let's really go all in here and, make sure it's not just a failed kind of effort. So a similar thing happened in 2022, actually, in Missouri. And we'll have to see if, it's different this time around. That didn't get the number of signatures. So some hope in Missouri, but ultimately it faces, kind of the same murky roadblocks. And you have to question whether or not the industry is really going to go all in on trying to legalize Missouri this year.
All right, let's close it out with Georgia. Sports betting still, of course, not legal in Georgia. So let's be clear on that fact. But again, parlay picks, props, things of that nature, you can find these things becoming available. And, that's really the only way that folks in that area can get their fix or at least come close to doing any sports betting. And it looks like Georgia's catching on to that as well, saying, hey, look, again, New York being the barometer, getting 50% tax. How much can we get out of these people who were betting in Georgia?
Yeah, Georgia's an interesting situation. From all the folks I've talked to in the industry, it's really their number one state they're focusing on for legalization this year. Obviously, it's a huge state with a lot of sports and a lot of interests. It's been hard, honestly, in the Deep South to legalize sports betting. You have different religious interests. You have different partisan loyalties. Georgia, especially, where it's mostly Republican. If not all Republicans are behind it, you need a few Democrats to get behind it. And the Democrats don't always like voting with the Republicans. So it makes it difficult. But the good news is that there is a bill already just in the second day of session filed in Georgia that would legalize sports betting. The bad news is it's not considered so industry friendly. It would actually do this really interesting thing where it taxes all bets at one rate, and then bets that are seen at kind of quote unquote high profit bets would be taxed at an even higher rate. So straight bets would be taxed at a 20% rate, which is sort of around, standard for the industry. But then parlays, player props, other props of that kind of same ilk, and live bets would all be taxed at 25%. So it's very unusual. We haven't seen anything like this before. From what I know, it's the first of its kind where, higher margin bets get taxed at a higher rate. Kind of the thinking behind that is parlays and props have been so profitable for sports books over the past year. We've seen their holds skyrocket across the board from about 9% to maybe 14% some months, which is really a big deal. And obviously, if you're paying attention to the industry, you're seeing these ads and promos for parlays pushed all over the place. So it's interesting that a state is realizing that and saying, hey, let's make some more money off that if that's what the sports books indeed are doing. But it faces another uphill challenge of a constitutional amendment, which would also be hard to do because it takes a lot more legislators to pass that. So I wouldn't hold out your hope in Georgia, but it is interesting to see kind of this new legislation on the table there.
Yeah. I mean, Sam. I mean, Kentucky ended up getting it done. I don't know if that North Carolina would qualify as Deep South. I mean, it's more of Mid-Atlantic. Mississippi, has
Yeah.
sports betting. Florida now at least has the Hard Rock. Alabama will be far behind. I know that, but it does make some sense when you think about it. It's not impossible that with Florida getting done and Kentucky getting done and Mississippi already being done, maybe there is a chance for Georgia.
Yeah, definitely there is a chance. The fact that you're running out of other states to look at, and Georgia's so big, and there's so many more of the Deep South states left out there. The Northeast is pretty much all off the board. It's good. You see the industry, the lobbyists focusing their attention now on Georgia as opposed to being spread out everywhere. So, time will tell, but it's boding well right now for their efforts, but it's going to face another kind of difficult roadblock there in the South.
All right. Well, great to catch up with you, Sam. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next week here on NewsWire. Thanks for coming on.
Yep. Thanks, Craig. You too.
All right. Coming up next, Ben Stevens is going to preview a couple of games in the NFL, Browns, Texans, Eagles, Bucks. Who better to preview, of course, the future of the Seattle Seahawks, the former Super Bowl champion, Robert Turpin. He's going to join us on the show live. We'll go over his experience with Pete Carroll as the head coach and what the future looks like in Seattle. Stick with us here on NewsWire. I'll be right back. Fun to do because you could kind of place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting, but New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
NewsWire, only on SportsGrid.
Quarterback at quarterback. We're going to lay some juice. We're going to have some dog prices, and we're going to go right in the middle.
Because I don't know what they're doing. To me, they're in a complete rebuild, Kev. Go run. That's where overbackers on this 51.5 shot.
So right now he's a little bit more over money, but it's hovering right around.
The winner of this game will be the division
I don't care if they win, because all we care about is the money, baby, the money.
Pro Football Today. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
The wife said we're getting the Stanley Cups, and now they got Stanley Cups in West Virginia.
Yep. They're doing $300 million gross a year in sales.
Listen, man, we don't need that much, man.
They're crushing
take
it.
a little piece of the Stanley Cup. I would drink from the Stanley Cup every day. I'll have inscribed on there. We'll get our BVB inscribed.
Yeah.
Stanley Cups.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
That tells you how good this league is. Jeff, you're mine. Big 12. Who's the team to beat?
Well, it's always Kansas. I don't care who comes in the league. And I love Kelvin Sampson, what he's done at Houston. I don't care. So Marquette, to me, is the best backcourt in the country. Tyler Kolek's the best point guard. Cam Jones is an elite scorer who just plays with such a good pace, and he's so smart.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
What did you think when you saw Lawrence on 3rd and 4th down, those two plays?
When you have a meltdown like the Jaguars have, the clear favorite coming into the season, we all know that, and they choke like they did, and they have this fall like they did, people are going to question what's wrong with Trevor Lawrence. He had a regression. It's not a major one, but he was not as good as last season. What's happened to the play calling?
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Yay, congratulations, but the game was over at that point, so another one of those terrible beats. If you had 3.5, 4, even 4.5, this was a 10-point game until the final closing seconds.
In-game live, prime time. Only on SportsGrid.
SportsGrid, the only streaming sports betting network. Tips, info, and insights to up your IQ. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. We're going to have Robert Turpin on the show coming up in just a few minutes. First, let's get a quick preview of a couple of the Super Wildcard Weekend games this weekend. First game on the board, Saturday afternoon, Browns and Texans. Last game on the board, Eagles and Buccaneers. Actually, it's not the last game. That's the second to last game being played on Sunday. So many games. That's why they call it Super Wildcard Weekend, right? Let's get a preview of a couple of the big ones in the NFL. Here's Ben Stevens.
Craig, as the NFL playoffs begin here in Super Wild Card Weekend, the weekend of games, 6 matchups in total, bookended by 2 spots where the top wild card seed in each conference, the AFC and then the NFC, is on the road against a divisional champ from the South Division in that respective conference, where the wild card team is a road favorite. We start with the first game up of the 6 on Super Wild Card Weekend, the first of the doubleheader on Saturday. The Cleveland Browns, the 5 seed in the AFC, heading to Houston, the 4 seed in the AFC South, divisional champions. And again, Craig, that top wild card seed, the Browns as the 5 spot, a 2.5-point road favorite in H-Town against the Texans. The over-under, 44.5. Craig, these two teams faced each other week number 16 of this NFL regular season, but it was a very different scenario for Houston. Still no C.J. Stroud in that football game as he was recovering out of concussion protocol, but Joe Flacco went off throwing for more than 300 yards once again. Amari Cooper had 265 receiving and 2 touchdowns. Now we focus on these trends. Cleveland as a favorite this year, 7-2 against the number. A very strong side when booked as the favorite. And straight up, they've only lost once in those 9 games as a favorite, 8-1, that outright record. But Houston, as an underdog, the Texans very comfortable in that spot. Not only 6-3 against the spread, Craig, but you're trying to survive and advance now in the postseason. Houston, one of 3 teams around the NFL, along with Pittsburgh and Baltimore, that has been booked as an underdog multiple times in 2023's NFL campaign and has a winning record. So 6-3 against the spread, 5 of those 6 covers an outright victory for Houston. Again, that total at 44.5. So that's the first matchup of the weekend. The opening matchup on Saturday, where the wild card team heads to a divisional champion's house and is a road favorite. Same story for the Monday Night Football finale of Super Wild Card Weekend. Philadelphia in Tampa Bay against the Buccaneers. The Bucs, the champions of the NFC South for a 3rd consecutive season, yet a home favorite. Now a flat field goal number in favor of Philadelphia. The Eagles banged up and the Birds on a slide to end out the regular season. Craig, Philly lost 5 of its final 6 games, did not cover in that 6-game span. As a favorite this year, though, for Philadelphia, 6-5-2 against the number. Tampa, for any team that was booked as an underdog at least twice throughout the 2023 regular season, the Buccaneers, Craig, the best underdog team in the NFL. 7-2 against the number. 5 of those 7 covers, an outright victory for this Tampa Bay side. A really good underdog entering this spot, over under 43.5. These two teams faced off in a similar scenario. Philadelphia was a single-digit favorite on the road week number 3 in Florida against the Buccaneers. Philly won that game by 2 touchdowns, 25-11. A different Eagles team than though. The playoffs, Greg, just 2 days away from getting started.
All right, thanks very much, Ben. And of course, the Seattle Seahawks did not qualify for the playoffs. Maybe that's some of the thinking as to why Pete Carroll is no longer the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. And joining us now to discuss that and a whole lot more is former NFL running back Robert Turpin. Of course, played under Pete Carroll in Seattle, also played for the Colts. I should mention, also a Hall of Famer at Utah State. We don't want to leave out Utah State, Robert. And congratulations, by the way, on all your success in media, calling games for CBS Sports Network, and doing a fantastic job with both college and pro football. Secondary career, I mean, that's what it's really all about, is not stopping after the first, and you're definitely making the most of it. Congratulations on that.
I appreciate that very much. That's quite the introduction. The transition part of it is always important for us, athletes, once we get done on the gridiron there. But thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Robert. And of course, watching you play, you and beast mode for many years, certainly remember those times too. Those were the good times. And it's not like, Robert, that Pete Carroll had bad times with the Seattle Seahawks. It just was, you go through a period, and you were there for it, where you're the best team in the NFL. I mean, if your name isn't Tom Brady and you're not on the Patriots, generally speaking, you're up for a couple of years, you're down, you're up, you're down. But I thought consistency is probably a good word to describe Pete Carroll's tenure in Seattle. Are you surprised that it comes to an end yesterday?
I was really shocked that they let him go yesterday. I really was. I thought at minimum that Pete Carroll would have an opportunity to at least get after it for one more year, especially when you think about the rookies that are on the team and the way that this team has been building. But you mentioned it, high expectations. And when you're part of a franchise with such high expectation, when you don't reach those pinnacles, man, anything that is not, of top echelon in the NFL is considered a failure to some degree. Last season, Seahawks were a playoff team. They barely made it in the wild card spot. They were knocked out from the first round, but that was supposed to be a building block heading into this season. And what happened this season? I thought the team was going to go to the NFC Championship game. I had high hopes and expectations for this football team, and so did everybody else, at least in Seattle. But they didn't even make the playoffs this year, and that's considered a major fail. And if you think about it from a statistical standpoint as well, offensively, weren't one of the greatest offenses in the NFL this season, but especially on defense, that's where they really dropped the ball, and I think maybe led into this decision by Seattle.
Okay, so here's where you can provide some insight here that I cannot. So help me make sense of this. So they're inviting Pete Carroll to be in the Seahawks front office. I would argue that the best front office move by any team in the National Football League, as it turns out over the last couple of years, was the trade of Russell Wilson from Seattle to Denver. And you know Russ well, we'll get into him as well. So I'm thinking if that's the case, that Pete Carroll may have had some influence on that trade. Maybe there was discourse there at the end. I'm not really sure. But if all of that is true, it feels like Pete Carroll got a really raw deal in this situation.
Well, obviously, towards the end there with Russ, there was some disconnect between him and Coach Carroll and even John Snyder, who's the general manager of the Seattle Seahawks to a certain degree. They just weren't on the same page, and that's what led to the trade. And it worked out well for Seattle. They got the draft picks that they got in the draft last season with Devin Witherspoon, I think going 5th overall. Then they got Jackson Smith and Jigba out of Ohio State, I think 15th overall. Two guys who had major impacts on the team this season, who was supposed to help sort of elevate this team from what they were able to accomplish the season prior, as I mentioned, make it into the playoffs, into that wild card round. But obviously didn't play up to par and kind of dropped the ball this season as it pertained to not making the playoffs. From a Russell standpoint, we'll see how that situation navigates itself. Obviously, Russ, the Broncos haven't had the best relationship to start, but relationships can be mended in the NFL, and we'll just have to see how it transpires.
I mean, they benched the guy for the last couple of games. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy in thinking that he's gone. I know that they're saying all the right things at the end, but that's what you say when you want to trade a player. I mean, personally, Robert, I think he's going to go somewhere else. Still going to play in the NFL, but I don't see it happening. Maybe I'm crazy in Denver. So let's go real quick to the kind of coach that you think that the Seahawks are going to look for in replacing Pete Carroll. I know we're still fresh into this. It's less than 24 hours. But in your opinion, is it someone that fits the mold of what Schneider's looking for? Is it the ownership involved here? Is it simply looking at a rebuild type situation? Because it feels like on paper, Seattle's not really in rebuild mode. They may not be a championship contender, but they're not going into next year where people are going to predict them finishing last or anything like that.
Seattle's always been an organization that has worked collaboratively with one another. So I would expect Jody Allen, obviously, to be involved in this coaching search, along with John Snyder. They may start with some familiarity. Dan Quinn out in Dallas, who was a defensive coordinator there, also was a defensive coordinator in Seattle. Dave Canales is the offensive coordinator in Tampa, but was with the Seahawks for a long time before getting that job in Tampa Bay. If they want to think a little bit outside of the box, listen, Pete Carroll has been a great coach for a long time. He has his way of doing things, both from a player standpoint, but also from a schematical standpoint as well. And I think what Seattle may be looking for here is someone who has some youth to their coaching abilities and some evolution as well, as far as, listen, we know Coach Carroll and his cover three defensively. We know what type of scheme that he wants to run. They may be seeking somebody with a young and new vision to bring into the organization and run the football team.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting look because there's competition with so many other teams having openings as well. Okay, Robert, let's get some opinions here on a couple of the games going on in the NFL. I know that this is a big part of what you're doing now in media, so I find it interesting to hear your perspective on this as a former player. We've got the Rams taking on the Lions in the Monday night football game to close out Super Wildcard Weekend. The Lions are 3-point favorites. The total is 51.5. The Rams have really come on late in the season, Robert, to make them feel like a potential sleeper. But at the same time, Detroit's been extremely consistent over the course of the year. They've lost a couple of games and got crushed. But beyond that, they've been one of the best teams in the NFL. What do you think happens on Monday night?
Yeah, you can't count out Detroit. They've been consistent as all get out. Should have got an upset win in Dallas, a few weeks before the season ended there. But I like the Rams. Now, the Rams didn't finish very strong. Matt Stafford's last game, he threw 2 interceptions, 1 touchdown. But with him returning to Detroit there, I think Rams get the upset in this one.
Okay, and then finally, Packers-Cowboys. The odds, Robert, which is what we focus on here, are heavily slanted in favor of Dallas. This line has not gone down. It's 7. They're 7.5-point favorites going into Green Bay. Jordan Love's playing some really good football. I'm worried about the Packers' defense in this game, Robert. Should I?
Yeah, absolutely. They haven't been all that great this season, particularly in the secondary. And Dallas, undefeated at home. They're explosive offensively. CeeDee Lamb's one of the best wide receivers in the league, not to mention Dak Prescott and what he's been able to do at the quarterback position. So I think Dallas wins in this football game. The Packers have had a really nice season, but they're still a very young team. They've done a good job overachieving to some degree, making it into the playoffs, but not good enough to beat Dallas quite yet.
All right, last thing for you, Robert. 60 seconds. Your old buddy from Oakland, Marshawn Lynch. Are you shocked at the success post-playing that he has had doing all these commercials and everything, and then for every single ad and every single I can't believe how active he is doing this. I thought we wouldn't hear from him ever again. He's doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, no, not at all. He's always had the charisma and the personality. It was just really about getting him to open up. And once he kind of decided in his mind that he was okay doing that publicly, all the opportunities started coming his way. So not surprised at all.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that. One of my favorites. All right, Robert, great job as always. Thanks for coming on the show, and we'll catch up in the future and see where things go. Thanks again.
All right, thanks.
All right, Robert Turpin with us here on NewsWire. We'll wrap it up next. Don't go away. Fun to do because you could kind of place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting, but New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
NewsWire, only on SportsGrid.
Quarterback at quarterback. We're going to lay some juice. We're going to have some dog prices, and we're going to go right in the middle.
Because I don't know what they're doing. To me, they're in a complete rebuild, Kev. Go run. That's where overbackers on this 51.5 shot.
So right now we saw a little bit more over money, but it's hovering right around.
The winner of this game will be the division
favorite. I don't care if they win because all we care about is the money, baby, the money.
Pro Football Today. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
The Weiss said we're getting the Stanley Cups, and now they got Stanley Cups in West Virginia.
Yep. They're doing $300 million gross a year in sales.
Listen, man, we don't need that much, man.
They're crushing
I'll take
it.
a little piece of the Stanley Cup. I would drink from the Stanley Cup every day. I'll have inscribed on there. We'll get our BVB inscribed.
Yeah.
Stanley Cups.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
That tells you how good this league is. Jeff, you're mine. Big 12. Who's the team to beat?
Well, it's always Kansas. I don't care who comes in the league. And I love Kelvin Sampson, what he's done at Houston. I don't care. So Marquette, to me, is the best backcourt in the country. Tyler Kolek's the best point guard. Cam Jones is an elite scorer who just plays with such a good pace, and he's so smart.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
What did you think when you saw Lawrence on 3rd and 4th down, those two plays?
When you have a meltdown like the Jaguars have, the clear favorite coming into the season, we all know that, and they choke like they did, and they have this fall like they did, people are going to question what's wrong with Trevor Lawrence. He had a regression. It's not a major one, but he was not as good as last season. What's happened to the play calling?
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Yay, congratulations, but the game was over at that point, so another one of those terrible beats. If you had 3.5, 4, even 4.5, this was a 10-point game until the final closing seconds.
In-game live, prime time. Only on SportsGrid.
SportsGrid, the only streaming sports betting network. Tips, info, and insights to up your IQ. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
I think the most surprising piece of news yesterday for most was the retirement of Nick Saban. I don't think people saw that coming, especially after the success that Alabama had again this year. But Saban has decided to retire, at least for now. Remember, Saban has said things in the past that haven't worked out to be true. He's left a couple different places, including saying he wasn't going to coach at Alabama and leave the Dolphins, and then he ended up doing that. But I would say that from his perspective at this point, I get it. Now, I'm in huge favor of college football paying the players and these NIL deals. But for Saban, who used to walk into a living room of a top recruit and say, sign with me, the trophy to that was the kid signing and then being with him for 2-3 years and then going to the NFL. Now there's no trophy at all, because after the player plays with Saban, he's got to do it all over again to keep the kid from leaving Alabama to go somewhere else that probably isn't even as good as an opportunity, but the kids are getting paid. And then that kid can actually leave that place and get paid somewhere else and go again. So I get it. It makes sense. I mean, I don't know what the answer is. Maybe it's one transfer. Maybe it's no transfers. Maybe it's getting the kids paid throughout their time in the schools. But does Nick Saban want to have to re-recruit all of his players after doing it the first time? The answer clearly is no. And how this affects things in the future still remains to be seen, but you can't argue against the success that he had in my lifetime watching college football, the most successful college coach of all time. No question about that. All right, that will do it for our show today. Thanks to Sam McQuillan from Legal Sports Report. Also, thanks to Robert Turpin from coming on, talking some Seattle Seahawks football, in addition to Vinnie Iyer from Sporting News. Thanks to our associate producer, Michael Cohen, our producer, Sam Yarnell. I'm Craig Mish. Enjoy the rest of your day. Early line next, Pharrell coming up at 3 o'clock Eastern, and I'll be back with you as we wrap up the week of shows. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, Warren Sharp will be on the program. We'll preview every game coming up in Super Wildcard Weekend, and who knows, by the time between now and tomorrow, some other coach may end up leaving in the NFL. Have a great day, everyone.